You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a very special episode. We are going to be interviewing Elizabeth Thames. To many of you, the light bulb instantly went off and you recognized her as Mrs. Frugalwoods. Fun fact, Liz was actually our very first guest on the ChooseFI Radio podcast, and she's back today. And we're going to be actually getting a chance to dig into the book that just got published called Meet the Frugalwoods, Achieving Financial Independence Through Simple Living. Liz is probably one of the best writers in the financial independence space. We wanted her to come on basically from the time we got off the interview last year, just to dig through more of her content. And this is the perfect excuse to bring her back on the show. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, Jonathan. Yeah, Liz is a good friend of mine, of the podcast, of the financial independence community. So this is absolutely wonderful. And it's really amazing news that she has this book being published. It's actually publishing tomorrow, March the 6th, 2018. And it's really incredible. And with that, Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back.
So Liz, it's been approximately 12 months and so much has happened since then. But along the way, you have not only gone through the process, but now actually have a published book. I mean, how does this happen? What has happened over the last 12 months to lead us here?
So the origin of the book actually started with the origin of Frugalwoods, the blog, which I've been writing since April of 2014. I began Frugalwoods really as a way to explain to my family the plans that Nate and I had, because it's fairly unusual, as most of your listeners know, to plan to retire early. Trying to explain that sort of in one sitting didn't seem very tenable. So Nate said, you know what you need to do? You need to write a blog because our family is going to think we're a lot less crazy if you write this out. I was like, I don't want to write a blog. So he kind of shoehorned me into writing this blog because he felt like it would sound a lot more articulate if I wrote it out. So that was the origin point of why we wanted to share our story. And from there, Frugalwoods grew and grew at sort of beyond my expectations and my understanding of why people would want to read what I was writing. But I think it resonated with people that I was just trying to share sort of our honest journey as we progressed through making the decision that the lives that we led, which on the surface were extremely successful. We were white-collar workers living in Cambridge. We owned a home outside of Boston. We had a dog. We had these great careers. We had sort of all of the trappings that you would assume would lead to a happy life. And yet we both felt deeply unfulfilled. Coming to that realization, acknowledging that essentially we'd done the wrong thing, we'd gone on the wrong path, and accepting that we needed to radically change our lives was the origin of making the decision to then move to a homestead in the woods of Vermont. And going from working to very traditional 9-to-5 jobs, living in the city, and then moving to a homestead sounds like a very radical departure, and it is. And so the blog and then ultimately the book really catalogs the thought process behind all of that. And while it is about money, and my blog is about money, the book is about money, ultimately it's about a question of what you want to do with your life. Because what I've found is that when you set your priorities and you decide where you want to go in your life, your money will follow. And that's what I hope people are able to take away from the book. So on a more granular level, the origin of the book was that HarperCollins, the publisher, reached out to me and said, would you like to write a book? And I said, sure, why not? I have a baby and I'm moving. Why not write a book as well? And so I took on the book project and had a wonderful editor at HarperCollins who really helped me to hone and refine the story that I was trying to tell about making these decisions and about the privilege that's inherent to being able to ask yourself the question of, what do I want to do with my life? What would I do with my life if I didn't have to work?
So Liz, HarperCollins is obviously a major name in the publishing world. Like, how do they just reach out to you out of nowhere? Did you ever find out the story behind how you came onto their radar?
So my editor at HarperCollins was a reader of Frugalwoods, which made me feel very good because she knew what she was getting into. I had a lot of trepidation about writing the book. It's a huge project, and I really wasn't sure that as a writer I was up to the task. But I thought, okay, she's read the blog, so she knows, the limitations that we're working with here. And that made me feel a lot more confident. And she also really understood the mission that I'm trying to espouse, because much of what I write about is not about how to save money at the grocery store or how to pinch pennies. It's much more about how to orchestrate a life that you enjoy living every single day, as opposed to a life that's beholden to sort of the mercurial highs of consumerism. And she understood that broader vision and really wanted to help me bring that to fruition in a book. So it was through the blog. And I would say to anyone who's interested in being a writer, the first step is just to start writing. I began the blog with 0 readers. I mean, like, no one was reading it. My mom eventually started reading it, but she couldn't figure out how to click on the links. So really no one was reading it. And it grew from there, though, because I had so much passion for the writing that I was doing. And so I'd say if, any unusual dream that you want to pursue, you really just have to start somewhere, and you have to start getting the words on the page or getting the music on the score and doing the work that's required.
And so, Liz, Nate actually bought you the blog, right? As I was reading through the book, and it's brilliant, by the way. I've read it twice. My wife, Laura, I think you said was maybe the first person other than your family and your editor to read it. Nice. She bombed through the book in like less than a day. I mean, I've known her for 15 plus years. I've never seen her tear through a book like that. So, I mean, really, we loved this book. But it's so interesting. Like, you're a friend of mine, and obviously I know some of your stories from speaking with you and obviously reading all your articles. But man, so many new things. Like, I didn't realize that Nate really just bought you this blog and set up Frugalwoods and didn't even give you essentially a say. And I say that very tongue in cheek, but in the name of the site, and you just got to writing. I mean, that's essentially how it started, right?
Yes, I was furious. So Nate says, I've bought you this blog. And it's like, how could you? I don't want a blog. Also, that's the stupidest name. I thought Frugalwoods was just the worst name imaginable. His thought process, though, is that he knows me very well, and he knows that I overthink things, and that if he didn't take that first step, I would have spent probably a year deliberating over the name, and then another 2 years trying to decide if I could actually write something. And so he played into my hatred of sunk costs. He'd already bought the blog. He'd already done all the back-end tech. And so he knew that I would feel compelled to bring it to fruition then because of those sunk costs. And he also knew that I really wanted to be a writer. I said for years, I really wish I could write, but I don't have any time. And that was never true. It's never that you don't have time. It's that you're not prioritizing what you want to do highly enough. And so he forced me to prioritize this thing that I always said I wanted to do. And it was really sort of a reckoning moment. Are you going to accept this challenge, or are you going to decide that you don't actually want to pursue this goal, this thing that you say you're passionate about? And so I was very mad in the moment, which I think is often a good catalyst for knowing that it's a good thing to do. Anything that's very challenging or difficult at the outset is often worth doing. And from that frustration and anger, I was really able to channel my passion into the writing of the blog. And the early posts on the blog are embarrassingly bad. I think about deleting them all the time. You can go back and read them if you want, folks. They're terrible. Learning through writing was very instrumental for me. And I think that applies to a lot of aspects of life. We certainly have to learn as we manage our money, and we have to learn as we pursue these different passions.
There's a couple points there that I wanted to touch on. And I'm going to start with what comes through in your all over the book is a lot of self-deprecating humor. And right behind that is these borderline limiting beliefs, which you just end up crushing almost every single time. And the piece of consistency behind every single time that you overcome this limiting belief has always been Nate. I mean, he's right there in the wings. And it's so amazing to me that when you combine your just raw talent and, perfectionism, which could be a limiting factor for you because it almost prevents you from taking that next step. He's there just to help you stretch yourself just a little bit. And the two of you combined, what you guys end up doing is it's just fun to watch. And you have created an absolutely amazing blog over the last several years. And I'm not surprised that the book is as engaging and as colorful as it is. But what's really surprising to me is that it's all original new content. You didn't just repackage, the stuff that you've been writing. I think you started this from scratch, right?
Absolutely. It's totally a scratch project. And I was reflecting earlier that some of the chapters were rewritten 20 times, which is really not an exaggeration. I would send them to my editor, and then she's so diplomatic. She would call me and say, what I feel is that instead of doing line edits, you should really just begin afresh. Open up a brand new Word document. I'm like, oh, it's that bad. But through that, I was really able to hone my writing and perfect the craft of not only the writing, but also the message that I'm trying to communicate. And so I'm grateful to my editor and to the process of writing and rewriting. And it was a really good lesson for me of assuming that I was sort of already at the top of my game and recognizing that I had so much farther to go and so much more to learn. And I think when life is a learning experience like that, we're never bored and we're never without a new task or a new goal. And so I was very grateful for the learning and the process of writing that I went through with the book.
One thing I wanted to point out, I know in the book you mentioned that you actually have had several blogs that didn't take off, that did totally fail. So this wasn't your first attempt at a blog, right?
That is correct. We had one blog that was, I still think it's a good idea, but just an idea that we never did. And then another blog where I think I wrote 2 or 3 posts that were just terrible, miserable. And so I didn't really see blogging as a viable medium for me. And the problem with those other blogs is that they were not my passion point. And pursuing what you are legitimately passionate about yields tremendous dividends. I worked for 10 years as a nonprofit fundraiser, which involves a lot of writing. I was writing every single day. I was editing other people's work. And yet I did not feel fulfilled through that writing. And that writing was not my best work. And what I didn't understand until I began writing about money and writing about financial independence is that this is where I feel called. And I think that when we're able to let go of the need to work just for a paycheck, solely for remuneration, we can actually explore where we can have the deepest impact in the world. There is something I think that everyone is genuinely passionate and successful at. You just might not be doing it in your day-to-day job. And being able to find that and having the freedom financially, but also mentally and emotionally to explore what that passion is, I think is paramount. And one of the ways that I got there was through this exercise of imagining myself as a 90-year-old woman, looking back on my life and thinking, what do I want to populate my life with? What are the memories that I want to create? And how do I want to see myself in the future? And so by keeping that at the forefront of my mind, I've been able to sort of let go of these shoulds and this notion that I should have a quote unquote successful career and instead find what it is that I really want to be doing.
Yeah, Liz, I was so struck by that as I was reading the book of, like you said, this type A personality, this gold stars and, doing everything I'm supposed to do. In knowing you now, frankly, I never would have known that you were like that a fairly short time ago, that career aspirations were so important and, doing what is societally correct or what expected of you. It's amazing as you chronicled your path of having that change, essentially to now you live in the woods in Vermont. And I'm curious if you've ever really thought back on, that's a short period of time. That's 5 to 7 years where you changed everything about your life. Could you have ever imagined this in your early to mid 30s?
I am still in my early 30s, Brad. Thank you very much. I am moving out of my early 30s. I don't think that I could have imagined this when I was in college. I was very bent on following these prescribed steps of first you go to college, then you get a degree, then you get a job, then you go to graduate school, then you get a better job. I thought that was the path to not only success, but happiness.
Where did that come from? Was that from your parents? Who are you mentoring yourself after? Who was your mentor that made you feel like that was the lane that you needed to be in?
I think I was firmly in the camp of being my own worst enemy. I think that all true type A perfectionists will understand when I say this, that the expectations I created for myself were far higher than any expectations that anyone else could place on me. And so I really built up this endless cycle of needing to achieve more and of ultimately not being happy with anything that I did achieve. And that's a very defeating way to go through life when you finish college and you can feel almost no success and from that, because all you're thinking about is the next step and the next move that you need to make. I think that's a struggle for me still. That's something that I work on all the time because it's very tempting to sort of chase these external validators and these external indicators of success. And I think consumerism is one aspect of that, buying things to sort of fulfill ourselves. But the other aspect of that is this sort of success train that we just cannot stop. So for me, it's been about finding work that is meaningful to me, regardless of whether or not it brings me recognition. And I think it's also true that I live by this philosophy of start now and don't look back. And so when Nate and I made the decision to radically change our lives, it felt like a failure. We'd invested a lot of time, a lot of energy into these careers, and we were just going to walk away. Does anybody do that? I had no frame of reference for this being an okay thing to do. And I think having the courage and the discipline to say, yeah, I want to change my life and I'm going to start right now is a very powerful thing.
Liz, you described something as the tumblers of adulthood. And as you're describing this now, that's what stuck out for me. I quickly found it in the book here on, looks like page 33. I took myself rather seriously at that point and felt like the tumblers of adulthood were clicking into place. Engagement, click. Real job, click. Living with Nate, click. I was only forward-looking, always pressed into the wind, craning my neck to see what I could achieve next, what more I could cross off my unending list. I saw the present as my platform for launching to the future, not as something with any merit of its own. And that just really stuck out to me as something, it was beautiful writing and just really powerful.
Thank you. Honestly, when I hear that, I am concerned that I feel that way still to this day. I think it's a lifelong challenge for me to sort of overcome that and to really reflect on the present and to really enjoy the moment that I'm in. So I've started this new life philosophy, I will call it, of leaning into the phase of life that I'm in, because in the past that's been very difficult for me. And I think having young children will do that for you, as you both know, very quickly. The present is very present and hours can really drag on. And I think enjoying this time while my daughter, soon to be second daughter, are young is important to me, both for them, but also for my well-being and for me to reflect on sort of the gift of raising children, which does not always feel like a gift, let's be clear. So this is something that I continually work on. So, writing about it really is a form of therapy for me. So, it's great that you guys read it, but it's also really helpful to me to reflect on these things. And I think that by reflecting on these things in my own life, I am able to advance and progress and not remain stuck in patterns and habits that don't work. And I say this about money a lot. If you're doing something with your money that doesn't work, just stop doing it. And it sounds overly simplistic, but honestly, it boils down to that.
I love that you bring that up because it boils down to your relationship with money. And in many cases, everything else is an extension of that. And what I love in the book is that, you draw so much from your time in New York, basically living far, far below the poverty level, just scraping by, trying to make things work, while at the same time doing fundraising, raising money from decamillionaires and billionaires. And you're navigating these two worlds at the same time. And it's almost like when you talk about this being therapy, this relationship, this, paradigm that you've created for yourself, you and Nate have created for your family, reflects a rejection of some of the stuff that you had to deal with in your earlier days. I'd love to hear you comment on that.
So I think for me, living in New York, and you'll know this if you read the book, but I was working for AmeriCorps, which pays a stipend at the time of $10,000 for the year. Food stamps were also provided, as was a Metro card for using the subway. But that was a fairly small amount of money to get by on in New York City. And I was able to save $2,000 of that $10,000 stipend in that year. Living that way helped me to realize a number of things. The first, I think, that I want to bring up is privilege. I had never fully understood what it actually means to live in entrenched generational poverty. And when I think about my own privilege, I realize that it extends all the way from before I was born, from having a stable family, parents who are happily married, and parents who were able to educate me at home, send me to great public schools, all the way on through my ability to go to college, go to graduate school, and have good jobs. And so I see privilege as something that is woven through my life inextricably. And I think it's really important to recognize that and to acknowledge the ways in which these advantages have really paved the way for me. It's certainly possible to achieve at any level coming from any background, but it was easier for me. The road was much easier for me. And I think it's very important to recognize that just talking about financial independence is a very sacred place. There are so many people for whom the idea of saving is impossible. They don't have access to banking. They don't make enough money to put any kind of actionable difference between their expenses and their income every month. And so just having the ability to make the decision to save more money is privileged. That was something that came into sharp relief for me living in a neighborhood of Brooklyn that was really plagued by deep, deep grooves of poverty. And although I'd understood it in an academic sense, I'd volunteered at soup kitchens, I'd read books about it, until I lived in it day to day, I didn't fully appreciate how great it is to live in a neighborhood where there's a grocery store or a bank, or you are able to walk home at night and feel safe. And so that was one aspect of learning that happened for me. And the other aspect of learning happened through my job, where I was raising money from, as you said, billionaires. And seeing the way in which they interacted with the world and with their money made me recognize that I wanted a life where money was not important. I didn't want to be sort of plagued by a lack of money, but I also didn't want to be ruled by this endless desire for more. I just felt that there had to be a deeper way of articulating a life, a deeper way of living than just wanting more money, more stuff, a better apartment, a better car. That seemed very empty and unfulfilling to me. And so I thought, okay, I knew nothing about financial independence. I really knew nothing about managing money. I mean, my knowledge at the time was woeful, but I thought, I just want to live a life where money is not the most important thing. And so that was kind of the first kernel of this idea that I wanted to live unconventionally.
And Liz, it was many years between when you had that job with AmeriCorps and when you and Nate had that first conversation to pursue financial independence, right?
It was. So I finished AmeriCorps in 2007, and we did not really talk about financial independence until 2014. And so that's a significant amount of time for those ideas to sort of germinate. I think that I had to go through that experience, those years of working conventional jobs, spending in ways that are sort of consistent with our consumer culture, for me to recognize that I really did want something different.
So Liz, you saved $2,000 of a $10,000 stipend. That is absolutely astounding to me. And I know that jumped out to me when I read it in the book. I'm curious, is that possible for other people? Did you do something otherworldly? I mean, also, did your privilege, as you call it, did that factor into it at all? Or were you truly just living on your own with that $10,000 plus the food stamps, plus the Metro card, I guess, right? And saving $2,000? Is that possible for other people with a little bit of knowledge?
So I'm always hesitant to say that what I've done is replicable to everyone, because I think everyone comes from a very unique set of circumstances. And I do not believe in the statements that we sometimes hear that, oh, if only people would work harder and save more money and be smarter about their money, then they wouldn't be in debt. They wouldn't have these problems. I think we get into a very dangerous position when we assume that we know the nuances of anyone else's situation. So it's important for me not to generalize and say that anyone can do what I've done, because I don't necessarily think that's possible. I think that, again, I was undergirded by privilege and by the knowledge that if something went wrong, I could call my parents and they would send me money. I never did do that and they didn't send me money, but I had that backing and that support. And I also had the knowledge that this was not a long-term position for me. I would not be struggling in this way for a long period of time. And I think there are a lot of psychological shifts that happen when you are in a long-term poverty situation versus one that has an end date. I think you think about your money in very different ways, and behavioral economists have documented this, that we do indeed perceive abundance and scarcity in different ways depending on our surroundings and the support that we have or don't have. So I'd be very hesitant to say that anyone can do it. And then in the next breath, I would say, I think that there are sort of lessons of frugality that people can take home and perhaps apply to their own situation. I think it's often possible to save a lot more money than we realize. And I think that it's such an unpopular thing in our culture to save that we're just not surrounded by a lot of examples of how to do that. And so something I talk a lot about on the blog is how to apply these lessons to your life and your situation. And through Frugalwoods, I run an Uber Frugal Month challenge, which is a month-long, essentially a reboot of your finances and a reboot of your savings. And it's an opportunity to examine your spending and really figure out how little you could live on every month.
And I'm aware of that. We actually had some members in our group tell us that they had joined your January challenge. Do you just do it in January, or do you have another one coming up?
No, it will be back in July.
Okay. We'll put a link to the page in the show notes so people can check that out. There's so much in your story here that I got to imagine at the time you never could have possibly imagined that you were going to have a way of documenting it and that it was going to come together to tell the story that it did. Because when you're in it, sometimes it's hard to take the larger view of it. But it really is remarkable, the series of experiences that you've had. And knowing who you are as a person, and your goal-setting mind, I need to check the boxes. I need to hit all these adult indicators. I need to get married. I need to get engaged. I need to get married. I need to have 2 children. I need to, get my master's degree, get the better job. You're starting to check these things off, right? You and Nate are both bringing income into your bank accounts. And at some point, your life gets dramatically easier. Are you carrying these frugal habits with you at this point, or are you still living on $8,000 a year?
Nate and I have both always been frugal people, and I don't really know why. The best thing I can come up with is that we're both wired for delayed gratification. That has translated into our adult lives in tremendous ways, but we both have stories of being little kids who would sort of hoard or savor treats or money. Neither of us were ever spenders. As children, as teenagers, as adults, we are just wired differently. And so that, in that sense, this was a much easier road for us because we really didn't have to overcome a great desire to spend for either of us. That being said, after we got married and, we had this joint bank account, we set a goal of buying a house. And this was a great thing for us because we wanted to buy a house in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world, Cambridge, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. So we started saving. I think we had a combined total of maybe $5,000 to $8,000 when we got married. And we just started saving from there. And this isn't a place where homes start at basically $500,000 and go up from there. And when I say homes, I mean like a studio apartment. So this is not an easy market to get into, but we just started saving. It was kind of this blind optimism, like we will start with our $8,000 and we will get there. And we did get there. And so when we were 27 and 28, we bought our home in Cambridge. And after that point, that's when we had a real spending problem. We had no next goal. We had no new destination after buying that house. That was it for us. And we didn't understand at the time that, if you don't have a goal for your money, it's just going to fly out the door. And so we were saving, I would say, around 40 to 50% of our income. And so that's still a pretty high savings rate. But that means we were spending 50% of our income, which is so much money to be spending, in my opinion. And, we were spending it mostly on food. I have to say, Cambridge has a really good restaurant scene. And we just made it our business to go to like every single restaurant. So food, takeout, coffee, thrift store outfits. I am really good at finding good clothing in a thrift store. And I found it all the time. And I had to buy it. And so the spending was not to the level that, would put you in debt or even jeopardize your savings rate. But it was a type of spending that was ultimately meaningless. It was on things that didn't bring us any kind of contentment, that weren't geared towards a long-term focus, and that were really just intended to kind of bump us along. I like to use the term road bump opiates because I think that's very much what our spending was. We were buying these little hits of pleasure that we thought would kind of make the work week easier, sort of make the 9-to-5 gray cubicle slog a little bit happier. You get a latte in the morning and then you can get a muffin in the afternoon, maybe also an iced tea, and just sort of dripping money throughout every week with no mindfulness around our spending. And what we came to realize is that we needed to spend only on our highest and best priorities. And once we started doing that, we started saving 70 to 80% of our income.
I love that when the Frugalwoods are really trying, that's when you get to 70 to 80%. The passively grazing through life Frugalwoods are only saving 40 to 50%.
Well, and what I also want to point out here is that, of course, there's privilege inherent to this. We had really good salaries. And I think that's important to recognize that, there's several sides of this equation, and one of them is income. And the more you make, the easier it is to save more.
Liz, I'm actually struck by a couple things you just said in the last 5 minutes because it ties into what my wife Laura had told me. She's like, she wrote these things down. She's like, you need to talk to Liz because these were my two big takeaways about the delayed gratification, which you just talked about, and the second marshmallow, right, from the Stanford experiment that they always talk about. And also the idea of you and Nate working together, which makes marriage better, brings you guys closer together, and having that goal. And I think that's so important. We heard Joel and Alexis from Phi 180 talk about that on the podcast as well, where having this goal stops you from just grazing through life. You're actually working together to achieve something. And it seems like, once you got on this uber frugal lifestyle and then set this plan for the move to the homestead, like that really juiced your savings from, like you said, 50%, oh, ho hum, right, to 70 to 80%. And I'm curious if you could talk about the actual benefits to your marriage that you saw from having that goal.
Absolutely. I recommend Frugality to everyone for their marriage. I'm serious. So one of the things that we discovered is that Frugality yields dividends far beyond saving money. The obvious thing is, okay, I need to save more money, so I'm going to be really frugal. What we came to realize is that there is this whole menu of benefits that you will derive from living a frugal lifestyle. And one of them was a closer relationship between Nate and I. When you're frugal, you are no longer paying other people to make your life less real. So if you're paying for example, someone to cut your hair, clean your home, walk your dog, wash your dog, care for your children, wash your clothing, cook your meals, you're not leaving a whole lot for you to collaborate on with your partner. Conversely, when Nate and I stopped paying for all of that, we had to start doing it all together. And I love using the haircuts as an example because people are like horrified that my husband cuts my hair. And I have to say, the first time we did it was a little nerve-wracking, but it made me realize that we live in this culture that tells us we can't do anything for ourselves, that we're sort of unable to achieve these ends, that we have to pay a professional. And most of the time we really don't. And so for Nate and I, it was uncovering sort of these layers of insourcing of things that we could do together. And it made us partners in every sense. And it made us much more respectful of each other. And it made us recognize all of the things that we could do together. And it also encouraged us to simplify and to let go. Because when you're cleaning your own home, you do not want to dust as much. This is me anyway. So I wanted fewer things to dust. So I just have less stuff. There's less to dust. And it was these kind of shockingly simple realizations that really changed our lives and that kind of revolutionized the way in which we relate to each other. And to the point of having a shared goal, I think that's paramount. Disagreement over finances is one of the leading causes of divorce in our country. And I think we know why, because the source of everything really is money. And I think it's hard for us to acknowledge that and say that because we want to feel that we are kind of above that. But in reality, money dictates how we spend our time, what we do with our lives, our health, our well-being. It is such a preeminent factor in all these elements of our lives. And so if you have control over your money, and if you and your partner are on the same page about what you want to do with your money, that path and that idea of what you want to do together for the rest of your lives becomes much more clearly articulated and becomes a lot easier to follow.
You know, what you and Nate have done, and stealing your own phrase from the book, is you've turned frugalizing into a game and constantly looking for these frugal analogs. And you see this light bulb moment, this excitement spark every single time you learned a new line item that you could find a frugal analog for. But to me, in your book, the sacred cow in all of this, at least from my outsider perspective, appears to be chapter 8, less makeup, more confidence. And, you know, the hair, I get it. I get that that's a high risk, high reward thing. But I know with my wife, the makeup's the one thing I'm not allowed to talk about. We're not allowed to touch it. It's just, that is something that we can't have that conversation. And I'm curious, like for you, what did that look like? What was that next frontier? What was that Oregon Trail like?
We forded the stream well. We didn't lose any oxen.
Dysentery took them all.
Dysentery did not. We were all raised in the 80s.
Yeah, children of the 80s. Unite.
I know. I need to see, can we find that for our kids to play? I really
Yes, I can hook you up. You can play online on your web browser. I'll put the link in the show notes for you.
Oh my gosh. No, I don't want to play. I do not need that in my life, but my child might.
It's so good. So tell us about the makeup, Liz.
So the makeup started as a way to save money because I was spending money on makeup. This seemed like a stupid thing to be doing because we used to be members of the signed first edition club at the Harvard bookstore, you know, because we were so erudite and had so much money. So we were buying these signed first edition books, all of which I have in my library now. And we decided to stop doing that. And I thought, wait a minute, am I really going to buy makeup and not buy signed first editions? I don't think so. So I decided to stop buying makeup, which means that I had to stop wearing makeup. This was very stressful for me. And so I had to eliminate like one piece of makeup. I can't remember if I did it each day or each week. It was a very drawn out process. Like, okay, I'm not going to paint my nails. I'm not going to wear blush. I'm not going to wear powder. And I finally sort of scraped away everything, used up all the makeup I had, didn't want to buy more. And at first I was like, okay, all right, I'm saving money. Great. I look terrible. As time went on, I started to realize that I was a more confident person. And I started to realize that I'd really been using makeup as essentially a way of projecting who I wanted to be to the world without actually feeling that confident. I never felt that confident. I never felt that successful, but makeup was a way to sort of get there more quickly, or so I thought. And letting it go opened up this new mindset for me that I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do. I had always worn makeup because that's like what women do. You wear makeup. And stopping made me realize that I actually did not have to. And I actually did not care if anyone thought that I should or should not be wearing it. And side note, I don't think anyone noticed. No one ever said anything. Nothing in my life changed. And then another step in this journey was not buying any more clothing. So I'd been buying clothes at thrift stores all the time, just constantly buying new clothes. I had so much clothes. It's obscene how much clothing I had. I still am getting rid of boxes and boxes of clothing years later that I wore, once or twice or not at all. And recognizing that I was using these external things to try and make myself feel better and feel more confident. And I think there's a lot of pressure on women to appear a certain way and to dress and act and even think along certain paradigms. And by letting go of these external indicators, the clothes, the makeup, the hair, I was able to then define who I want to be as a person. And I realized that I could then focus on what I was creating as opposed to what I was consuming.
Yeah, and Liz, there was one particular quote here that really stuck out to me, and this is the perfect time to read it. So you said, at the same time, I was invigorated the first day I went to work without makeup. I felt like I'd accomplished something, like I'd vanquished an old foe that had dogged me for years, hanging over my shoulder, whispering, "You're not good enough," in my ear. I'd thrown off this tormentor, and it made me feel powerful. If I could do this, what else could I achieve? And yeah, that is just absolutely brilliant. And I really want to talk about this makeup just a little bit more, because I was so struck by this that, as a man, and I have no insight into the world of makeup, I had no idea that, according to my wife, 99%, she just made this up, right? 99% of women don't leave the house without wearing makeup. That just never crossed my mind. And especially, frankly, for you, Liz, you're Liz from Frugalwoods. I never would have assumed that the day that you forgot to wear your makeup, you stopped, I think, off the bus or the metro or whatever it was, and stopped at a CVS and spent $50 to get makeup just for that day. That was just, that was astounding to me. Like, you're so confident, and I couldn't fathom that would have been you a short time ago. And I'm curious, as me personally, the father of 2 daughters, what would you tell me about how can I teach my girls to be more confident in this world and not so, I guess, tied up in self-appearance or whatever it was that caught you in this lifestyle, that you had to have the right clothes, you had to have the expensive boots and the makeup and all this stuff. Talk me through what I can teach my girls.
I would also like to know the answer to that, as I have one daughter and another daughter on the way. So I would love to know what to say to her. But I think it starts very young. And I think it starts with how we talk to our daughters and to our sons, and the value that we place on appearance. And so one of the things that my husband and I do is we don't talk about our daughter's appearance. She's only 2, but she understands every single thing we say and repeats it all back to us. So I know that she's internalizing the messages that, that she receives from us and from others. So just not having a focus on appearance. I think we often say to little girls, "Oh, you're so cute. You're so pretty." We don't say that to little boys. And so trying to shift that paradigm with our daughter and not focusing on how she looks is very important to us. And so it's my hope that she will understand that that's not something that's important. Sure, you can look nice, and there's no problem with looking put together and nice. I like to get dressed up. We get dressed up for church every week. And so she says, we're going to wear fancy clothes. I say, that's right. We're all going to wear fancy clothes for church. But there's not this focus on sort of, well, you need to look a certain way, or you need to wear certain clothes. Another way in which I do that is through my own behavior, because our children model everything that we do. I am not critical of myself or my body, even though I sometimes feel that way, especially when I'm very pregnant. I perhaps don't feel that lovely, but I'm very careful not to send those messages to my daughter. And my husband is the same way. And I don't put a lot of focus on my own appearance. So she doesn't see me spending a lot of time fixing my hair or doing makeup or anything like that. And so my hope is that she just understands that, yeah, it's a part of life. You get dressed every day, but it's not the focus. So for me growing up, it was very much a focus on how we looked. And it's something that I internalized from a very young age. And then I think that marketing and society does another number on our daughters by teaching them that beauty is sort of your best attribute. So negating that is crucial to the way in which I hope that we are raising our daughters. It's one aspect of who you are, but there are so many other things that are more important. And so it's funny, her grandparents will sometimes say, "Oh, you're such a cute girl." I say, "Please don't put the focus on that. Let's talk about something else." And they've gotten much better. "Oh, you're so brave or courageous." Just focusing on other elements of her personality. My hope is that, we can sort of grow into helping her evolve past a focus on appearance that took me until I was, 31 or something. So hopefully we can get her there a little bit sooner than that. And I think there's a cultural consciousness around this right now that we didn't have perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. And so it is my hope that we are able to create a society and a culture in which women are not expected to be the standard bearers of perfection. And I think that perfection manifests itself in your appearance, in your dress, in your talk, and in your actions. It's my hope that we can move past that very limiting, narrow-minded belief.
I'm so glad you gave a couple examples of what those words of affirmation actually look like. And in particular, highlighting, virtues or character qualities. That's just so valuable to see, what that would specifically look like for your child. And also, you're so right. I mean, our society, our culture, everything that our kids are and us are exposed to is that our self-worth is intertwined with our appearance and with our stuff. I mean, that's just how we were raised, right? And ultimately this, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I mean, if we can separate that, if we can build value outside of that false construct, it's just setting yourself up for such a fulfilling life.
I agree. And I think for us, I feel like in some ways we've taken the easy way out because we live in rural Vermont. There is not a focus on appearance out here. I would say that I actually cannot think of any women right now that I know who wear makeup. It's just not really a part of life out here. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like, I kind of took the easy way out for raising my daughters. But I think it's been inspiring to me to sort of learn from the women that I now live around in Vermont, because they are deeply confident and deeply proficient in homesteading, farming, so many things that I know nothing about. And so it's an inspiring way to live, I think, to kind of surround yourself by people who you'd like to be like. And that's an important thing, I think, for our children and for us as well. You really ultimately are going to sort of take on the attributes of the people who you spend the most time with. And so I think it's important to be very thoughtful about that. And not only your friends, but also in your media consumption and just in the things that you decide to allow into your life.
And Liz, it also sounds like you have a wonderful community there in Vermont, just generally. Not only are they setting a good example with the makeup, obviously, but just a couple quotes here. We'd lived in Vermont for barely 2 months, and we already knew more people and had a more gratifying community life than we'd ever had in the city. I didn't know I was missing, lacking even the warmth, the support, and the wisdom that a community offers until we moved to Vermont. And yeah, those just really, really stuck out to me. I'd love to hear the differences that you've found between rural Vermont and the big cities that you've lived in for basically the decade prior to that.
Yes, the difference is astounding. And it's everything that we hoped for, but did not know if we would achieve. And the book delves into a lot of my neuroses and fears over moving here because we bought our property when our daughter was about a week old and was still in the NICU. And so I thought, this is not a good life decision. Like I'm always telling people, be strategic, don't pile on many life events at once. And here I am having a baby, buying a homestead. So I had a lot of nerves around making this decision, and we almost backed out at the last minute, which you can read about in the book. But we have been overwhelmed with how wonderful this community is. And we live in a town of about 400 people, and it is unbelievable, the community-minded spirit that infuses life out here. And I think what I've come to realize is that I think you can find this community anywhere. I think it's just not as prevalent in the city. We have a consumer culture that has created sort of these false bands of identity that don't really give us a deeper connection, but that give us the facade of a connection. So the brands that we wear or the cars that we drive or the laptops that we use, I do have a Mac, but I'm just saying, and finding a way to kind of transcend those superficial communities and find people who really value the same things as you and who really want to be a part of your life in a deep way. This is another way that I think Frugality is very instrumental in building community. When we lived in the city, Nate and I got into this idea of barter and trade. I thought barter and trade was this sort of like antiquated little house on the prairie idea that, Oregon Trail idea that no one did. But I have found so many people are so excited to barter and trade because they don't want to pay for stuff either. And so in the city, the best example we had was taking care of our dog when we went on vacation, we would just swap dog sitting with our friends and neighbors. So we'd have their dog for a week. They'd have our dog when we went out of town. It was a wonderful system. The dogs were so much happier not being boarded in a kennel. None of us paid any money, and it built this community of friends around, this shared need to have care for your dog. And so extrapolating that to all aspects of life has been really important for us and really instrumental in building community and really building family outside of a traditional family context.
Yeah, the barter aspect, I actually highlighted that specific paragraph because I got to look into building a network of people that want to do a dog share, because that really is it's a huge, when you want to go out of town, by figuring out what to do with the dogs is you can only pull that favor card so many times. So that was a really big light bulb moment for me when I read that. And I was like, I need to look into that.
It really works well because everybody else with a dog feels the exact same way. And so we had, I don't know, maybe 6 to 10 different families that we would swap around with. And it wasn't a formal system. It's not like, oh, well, you owe us for this time. It just seemed to sort of work out. And sometimes we kept people's dogs who we didn't really know the person, but they were a friend of a friend. And it honestly worked out very well because one friend couldn't do it and they'd say, well, we can't, but maybe our other friend who also has a dog can do it. And it was a great system.
So Liz, there's so many different places that we could take this conversation, but I think ultimately what it comes down to is, how do you want to spend your two most precious resources, your time and your money? And what that comes back to is specifically the idea of resources. And what I love about the financial independence community and the frugal community that you've really fostered is this intentionality around resources and around consumerism. And I know what's really cool, as an added benefit, being frugal has a positive impact on the environment. And I'd love to get your take on that. How does your interest in conservation tie into your ideas about frugality?
Environmentalism, as I discovered, is one of those other tertiary or secondary benefits of frugality. The more frugal that Nate and I became, the more environmentally conscious we became. We've always been pretty progressive, environmentally friendly people. We always thought we were doing a good job. But what I never understood is that you really cannot buy your way to green. You have to live it from the inside out. And so consuming less is a wonderful place to start with an environmental outlook. And what we found is that the less we buy, the less we throw away, the less we have to be wasting. And this translates into food as well as material possessions. And the food waste thing was pretty huge for us because what I came to realize is that food waste is a major problem in landfills and that it's a leading creator of methane. The more food that we waste, the more methane that we have in our environment. And the statistics on how much food a family wastes in a year is staggering. I think it's over $1,000 in grocery costs that go into the trash for a family of 4. That's pretty astounding when you think about it. This is food you've bought, right? That you don't eat, that you put in the trash, and that used to be us. Oh, we were so bad, especially the produce aisle. I don't know what it was. We would just buy all this produce that we would never eat. And coming to the realization that we should not, could not, and did not want to do that anymore was huge. When you start thinking very consciously about every single thing that you bring into your life as having a responsibility for it, I am responsible for this carrot. I am responsible for this chair. I cannot just throw them out. It helped us to simplify and to streamline. And it became this overarching perspective through which we saw every aspect of our lives. So we now have a hybrid car. We have a Toyota Prius, which in part, it's a lot cheaper. The gas, we spend so little on gas, but it's also fantastic for the environment. And so having these secondary and then tertiary benefits are, I think, one of the more transformational elements of frugality. And recognizing that you can actually create this much more sustainable lifestyle through spending less and through consuming less, which benefits the environment, it benefits your community, and it also helps you reach your financial goals. And so it's kind of what is not to love about that?
I would love to interject. That approach is apolitical. And I think it's just almost anecdotal and somewhat observational from the side that the FI community, by focusing on their personal choices, over time, it's inevitable. You become more intentional and you tend to reject waste. It becomes abhorrent to you. That naturally moves you to more of a conservation mindset. And I think it's very empowering and just kind of interesting to observe that. But I love your perspective on that. And I'm saying that hopefully as an outsider, just I can appreciate not only your perspective as you laid it out, but just the general framework that our community approaches this idea of conservation.
Absolutely. And another way that this comes to fruition is through deciding to buy things from the used market. There is so much embodied cost in a new product that when we're able to step outside of that news cycle and the packaging, the transportation, and instead buy something on the used market, you're both sidestepping all of the embodied costs of new, but you're also keeping something from a landfill. And that has been an instrumental realization for me. You know, when I choose to take used clothes for my daughter, for example, A, it's free, which is fabulous. B, I don't have to shop, which I hate to shop. C, I'm not incurring all of the costs and overhead of buying new. And I am also keeping clothing out of the landfill, which clothing next to food is another major contributor to landfill waste and a major problem in our country. And so there's I see it as this entire cycle of weaving environmentalism and frugality and simplicity all into the same whole. And the other element of buying used is that you don't have to make decisions. This is an amazing thing. I used to spend so much time trying to decide between, material good A and material good B. Like a lot of my time and energy went into researching and deciding. Conversely, when I just take something for free that's used, there's no decision that enters into it. And I'm usually ultimately happier with the end result than if I had spent all this time researching it.
Yeah, there's such a paradox of choice when you have all those different options. You get mentally, I know it shuts me down, frankly. Like I would rather just have a few options or in all likelihood, just one. And I know in your book here, you said frugality also eliminates the paralysis by analysis that's endemic to buying new. If we decided to buy everything new, hours of our lives would have been lost to comparing the merits of a City Mini versus a Snap and Go. And you're saying by taking whatever came our way for free, the time and stress endemic to making these choices was eliminated. And I absolutely love that. And, you talked before about thinking consciously, but really the creativity aspect of it is important too. And, you also said on another page, these revelations also led me to realize that paying money is the laziest, least creative way to solve a problem or reach a desired end. There's no innovation in slapping down a credit card. And then you go on to say a frugal life is a creative life and one that's devoid of clutter, both physical and mental, and absent any boredom. And I absolutely love those. I circled and starred and wanted to read on the podcast because they're brilliant.
Thank you. I think there is a lot of mental liberation from living this way. And I think there's a false assumption that being frugal is difficult or that it takes a lot of time, but it actually has given me back immense amounts of time and mental freedom. When you think about the mental energy that you put into deciding what to buy in a store, what if you just didn't do that? What could you do with that energy and that time instead? What Nate and I have realized is that we're able to achieve quite a bit in a day because there's a lot that we don't do. When you let go of these drains on your time and on your money, you're able to choose circumstances. I think a lot of times in our culture, we think that choice of, this car versus this car, that's the real choice. But the actual true choice is when you choose your circumstances over material goods. We see that as what we've done in our lives. So rather than spend a bunch of money on a bunch of stuff, we just don't buy the stuff and we instead have bought time and we've bought freedom for ourselves.
I would love to close this with this final quote. I think it speaks to the point that you're making right now. You said, consumerism encourages us to discard anything that we're bored with, to buy more and gobble as many resources as we can possibly swallow. Consumerism made me into an insatiable grabbing taker, whereas frugality transformed me into a mindful, grateful giver. And I think that idea, we constantly see it come up. Someone that starts to understand the power of gratitude is going to be a much happier person. That's the secret sauce that we keep coming back to over and over and over again. And I love how the financial independence community the Frugalwoods Frugality community, and this intentional living community. It all comes together and we start to realize and focus on this idea of gratitude. So, Liz, I'm grateful for you for coming on the show today. This has been so much fun.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I think when you talk about gratitude, I think it's very easy to perceive that we're surrounded by deprivation or abundance. And in many ways, we can really choose which of those realities we want to follow. And when we choose abundance, we're no longer beholden to this need or this drive for more. We're thankful for everything we have. And I think we're much more inclined to be philanthropic and to share our resources and to realize that we are ultimately so much happier with so much less.
That is a perfect way to end a podcast. And Liz, Meet the Frugalwoods, Achieving Financial Independence Through Simple Living comes out tomorrow, March 6th. And where can everybody find it if they want to purchase the book?
So I have a post on Frugalwoods that gives you a link to all of the retailers where it's sold, but you can buy it anywhere that books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can also ask that your library order a copy.
Oh, yes, you should definitely do that. But for those of you that can't wait, you can go to ChooseFI.com/frugal, and that will send you directly to the pre-order page. Thank you, Liz, for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I love this book. Brad's read it twice. I've read it once. And I admit I'm a little bit aggressive with the highlighter, but I highlighted almost every single chapter. I think this is just a wonderful book if you want to explore someone that's really developing a philosophy about approaching life with intentionality, simplicity, and frugality. This is a book that you should pick up. Yep. Try to get it from your library. We approve of that process, but if you don't want to wait for it, just go to ChooseFI.com/frugal or just check out the show notes for today's episode. There will be links down at the bottom on how to get a copy of this book. We're so grateful to Liz for coming on the show today, and we hope you got value from this episode. If you want to support us and what we're doing here at ChooseFI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to ChooseFI.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to ChooseFI.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to ChooseFI.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.